Welcome, my name is BALLERSCUBA. This is Video Games Over Time. The goal of Video Games Over Time is to explore the history of video games from the beginning to the modern day. This video is the start of our journey, and our journey will begin with the history of modern computing. After all, without hardware capable of playing them, video games could not exist. Our story starts way back in 1936 with the concept of the computer itself. An English mathematician named Alan Turing published a paper I'm calling On Computable Numbers, though the name is actually quite longer. In this paper, Turing sets out the principles of a hypothetical machine that could be created to hypothetically solve any solvable problem using a set of rules. These Turing machines would be able to perform any mathematical computation as long as that computation could be represented as an algorithm. Although the point of the paper was to disprove that any yes or no question would always have an absolute and definite yes or no answer, Alan Turing had come up with the idea of a modern computer. Although the principles set out in Alan Turing's paper may not have been unique in the world of mathematics, the paper thrust Alan Turing to the forefront of theoretical computer science. But computer science was still just that, theoretical. As we will see as we continue, coming up with something and actually creating that thing are entirely separate. So we move forward to 1941, just 5 years later. In Nazi Germany, an engineer named Konrad Zuse created the Z3 fully automatic digital computer, which was, unsurprisingly, Zuse's third computer. The Z3 is considered to be the first Turing machine. It was fully operational, entirely digital, and was electromechanically programmable. Unfortunately, not too many people were aware of the computer's importance, not even the German government, and funding was hard to come by, especially since Zuse seemed uninterested in the war effort. Plus, Germany in 1941 was not the safest place to store a computer. Thanks to several bombing runs, all of Zuse's computers, including the Z3, were lost due to explosions. Zuse would survive, though, and continued his work on computer science. In the Allied nations during World War II, progress in computing was being made as well. A lot of that time was spent trying to break the German encryption machine, Enigma. Alan Turing himself played a key role in this effort. To break the Enigma encryption, electromechanical machines known as bombs were created, not to be confused with, bombs. Although these bombs were not computers in the modern sense, the automated processes helped advance computer science. When Enigma was finally broken, Alan Turing became a war hero, and computer science proved to be practical to the real world. Also in an effort to break the German encryption codes, Tommy Flowers, an English engineer, developed the Colossus Computer. The Colossus Computer became operational in February 1944. Colossus was the world's first electronic digital programmable computer. It would read paper tape for its input, but could not store any data itself. Despite its limitations, the Colossus, in all its iterations, proved to be instrumental in the Allied war effort as well. Meanwhile, in the United States, the Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer, or ENIAC, was being built. It was more flexible and much faster than the Colossus. It was without a doubt a complete Turing machine, being able to compute any program that would fit into its memory. Under the direction of John Mauchly and J. Presper Eckert at the University of Pennsylvania, with female mathematicians as the programmers, the ENIAC became fully operational at the end of 1945, after World War II had ended, so it played no practical part in the war effort. But just 4 years after the Z3, the United States had its own complete Turing machine. With the war over, we can now start looking at video games. In 1947, Thomas T. Goldsmith Jr., along with Cecil Ray Mann, received a patent for what was known as a cathode ray tube amusement device. With this patent, a device could have been made that would replicate an artillery shell on a CRT screen connected to an oscilloscope with knobs and switches. This amusement device would have used an overlay over the screen to show targets that could then be hit by the missile displayed on the screen itself, controlled by the player. This kind of device would not have used any sort of digital computer to execute a program or to store any kind of memory, so it's difficult to justify it as a full video game. but it would have electronically displayed the instruments used in an interactive electronic game. Although the patent was granted, the device never made it past the prototype stage. We'll have to wait to blow up targets for another day. In 1948, the first piece of video game software was written. It was written by D.G. Champernoun, an English economist and mathematician, and Alan Turing, a name that should be familiar by now. They wrote a chess simulation named TuroChamp, which would pit a human player against a computer opponent. Although the code was finalized, the code was too complicated for any computer at the time to actually run. The world needed more powerful computers. So Alan Turing turned to the University of Manchester. There, Turing helped Tom Kilburn create the Manchester Baby, a small and primitive computer even for the time. The Manchester Baby ran its first program on June 21st, 1948, becoming the first working machine to have all the parts essential to a modern electronic computer. The Manchester Baby led to the Manchester Mark I, also made at the University of Manchester. The Manchester Mark I started operations in April 1949. This improved upon the Manchester Baby by using index registers, making it easier for the program to run through the computer's memory. Meanwhile, at the University of Cambridge, computer scientist Maurice Wilkes designed and helped build the Electronic Delay Storage Automatic Calculator, or EDSAC. The EDSAC started operations in May 1949, becoming the second electronic digital stored program computer to go into regular service. British universities were on the forefront of computer science, with now several computers in service. But video games were taking root on the other side of the Atlantic. At the 1950 Canadian National Exhibition, Canadian engineer Joseph Cates demonstrated Bertie the Brain. Bertie the Brain was an arcade game of tic-tac-toe. Standing at 13 feet or 4 meters tall, Bertie the Brain used light bulbs to display the game instead of a screen with graphics, but it is one of the candidates for the first video game. That, of course, depends on your definition of a video game. Bertie the Brain pitted players against an artificial intelligence with different difficulty settings, and at the highest setting was unbeatable, because if you're gonna be playing tic-tac-toe, expect a lot of ties. Bertie the Brain was built in order to showcase Joseph Cates' Adatron tube, which was able to perform the function of 10 vacuum tubes. After the 2-week Canadian National Exhibition, Bertie the Brain was dismantled as more of a novelty than a landmark achievement. As for the Adatron tube, patent issues delayed any sort of commercial release, and something far better came along before the tube made any significant impact. To this point, computers and video games were only ever used as exhibitions, not something commercial that could be sold. But that changed in 1951 with the first computer sale. British electrical engineering and equipment firm Ferranti sold the Ferranti Mark I to the University of Manchester. The Ferranti Mark I was an updated version of the Manchester Mark I, with improvements to the size of the primary and secondary storage, as well as giving it a faster multiplier and additional instructions. Although only 2 Ferranti Mark I's were ever sold, with the other going to the University of Toronto in the following year, the Ferranti Mark I opened the market for commercial computers. The commercial company was able to improve on the university's design so much that the university purchased an upgraded version of the thing they created only 2 years earlier. On May 5th of the same year, Ferranti, at the Festival of Britain, would go on to showcase their newest model, the Nimrod, in an effort to advertise their new commercial computers. Standing at 12 feet by 9 feet by 5 feet and weighing over a ton, the Nimrod computer allowed players to play the game of Nim, a strategy game where players remove objects from heaps until someone has to take the last object, thereby losing the game. That's always fun, being forced to make the final move that loses you the game. Like Bertie the Brain before it, Nimrod used light bulbs rather than a screen with graphics, so whether it is a full video game is a matter for debate. After being displayed at the Festival of Britain, the Nimrod computer was shown for 3 weeks in October at the Berlin Industrial Show before being dismantled. The following month, in June 1951, Remington Rand released the Universal Automatic Computer 1, or UNIVAC 1. The first customer would be the United States Census Bureau. This was the first mass-produced computer, with Remington Rand going on to sell 46 of these machines, each selling for more than $1 million, roughly $10 million in 2020. Despite the seemingly low sales figures, the idea that the same computer model could be sold to several different customers was a big deal at the time. Also in 1951, Dr. Diedrich Prinz in England designed a limited chess program for the Ferranti Mark I. It could not play a full game of chess. In fact, it did not have any video output. It was instead designed as a puzzle game, where checkmate must be reached in 2 turns under a limited rule set. In 1952, Christopher Strachey, a British computer scientist, completed his work on a simulation of checkers. His game of checkers would have a screen with a video display, arguably making it the first video game. At the very least, it was one step closer to a video game than its predecessors. On top of that, this simulation could be used on a general-purpose computer instead of a custom computer designed specifically for it. That same year, Alexander S. Douglas, a British professor of computer science, created OXO, Noughts and Crosses, for the EDSAC computer at the University of Cambridge. OXO was a simulation of tic-tac-toe that would display on an electronic screen. The player would use a rotary phone dial to select one of the 9 squares to place their mark, and the computer would then play in turn. Once again, depending on the definition, OXO could be considered the first video game, albeit another instance of tic-tac-toe. In 1953, the University of Manchester created the Transistor computer. The first transistor computer was an experimental computer designed around using a transistor. A transistor is a semiconductor that, in computers, can replace vacuum tubes. Transistors are smaller, require less power, and give off less heat. This results in a much smaller size, a lower initial price, and a lower operating cost for the computer. The move to transistors is so important that change sparks what is known as the second generation of computers. Thankfully, this marked the end of the large vacuum tube-based computer systems and allowed for computers to be able to fit inside a normal-sized room. In 1954, Alan Turing died. 2 years earlier, in 1952, Alan Turing's home was robbed. During the investigation into the robbery, Turing's private life was revealed to the police, and Turing was arrested due to his homosexuality. Given a choice for his punishment, Turing chose chemical castration instead of prison. Alan Turing died from cyanide poisoning, ruled a suicide by the British authorities. The father of computer science was just 41 years old. Let's turn back to video games. In 1954, the University of Michigan developed the first video game with real-time graphics. It was a billiards simulation that functioned on their mid-sack computer. Unlike previous games where the screen would only update when a move was made, this pool simulation would show the movement of the billiard balls at a rate of roughly 40 frames per second, also known as not good enough by today's standards. Once again, though, this was designed as a way to showcase the power of the computer itself, and not designed to be a standalone video game. In February 1955, the Atomic Energy Research Establishment in Harwell in the UK built the Harwell Cadet, Transistor Electronic Digital Automatic Computer, but backwards because the normal initialisms were too simple, I guess. The Harwell Cadet was the first fully transistorized computer, according to most records. This was just 2 years after the first computer used a transistor. Speaking of the first computer to use a transistor, the University of Manchester completed the full-size version of their transistor computer in April 1955. It still had some vacuum tubes in it at the time, so once again, the University of Manchester had the idea and then fell behind. 3 years later, in 1958, American physicist William Higginbotham designed Tennis for Two. He designed the game for the Brookhaven National Laboratory's annual public exhibition. It worked with the research institution's Donner Model 30 computer, which used an oscilloscope and custom controllers to represent a tennis court from the side. While this was not any more advanced than the other games that had been created to this point, this was the first time that a video game was created purely for entertainment reasons. Tennis for Two was not designed to showcase the computing power of the machine, it was designed to be fun. as such, it is sometimes considered the first video game. Tennis for Two was instantly popular, which led to an upgrade and an exhibition the following year before being disassembled. In that following year, 1959, IBM, an American technology company, announced the IBM 1401. The IBM 1401 was designed for smaller businesses, allowing them to purchase a computer instead of using older electromechanical punch card machines. The IBM 1401 was also marketed to larger businesses so it could perform peripheral services for their larger computers. The IBM 1401 would become a huge success, selling over 12,000 units, about a third of the world market at the time. IBM became a leader in the second generation of computers. Also in 1959, Digital Equipment Corporation, an American computer company, released the PDP-1, Program Data Processor 1. Although this computer was large, weighing roughly 1,600 pounds, the PDP-1 is considered a mini computer. It was also quite expensive, selling at the base price of $120,000, over $1 million in 2020. Shockingly, the PDP-1 did not sell particularly well. DEC would only sell about 53 PDP-1s over the course of 10 years. But this computer would go on to play a big role in the history of video games, particularly the one donated in September 1961 to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. In 1962, Steve Russell, a Harvard employee at the time, created a space combat video game named Space War for MIT's PDP-1. Space War is a game involving two spaceships known as the Needle and the Wedge, each controlled by a player. The two ships attempt to shoot each other while in the gravity well of a star. This game would then be spread to other installations of the PDP-1 computer, primarily academic institutions. This made Space War the first known video game to be played at multiple computer installations. After its initial creation, other students added on to the game, adding more ships, adding a cloaking device, space mines, and even a first-person perspective. Although powerful, Space War was not very widespread, only being programmed on institutional computers. Although the program would become preloaded on future PDP computers, it was never considered mainstream. Those who were lucky enough to find it, though, loved it. The early 60s saw the start of the third generation of computers, thanks to the integrated circuit. Invented in 1958 by Jack Kilby, an electrical engineer at Texas Instruments, and Robert Noyce, a physicist at Fairchild Semiconductor, an integrated circuit is a set of electronic circuits on one piece of semiconductor material, typically silicon. These integrated circuits decrease the cost of computers while increasing their performance. Although they were invented in 1958, it would take a few years before they hit the market, appearing in government computers in the early 1960s and commercial computers in the mid-1960s. The third generation would take its time, fully replacing the second generation of computers, which was still dominated by IBM. In 1964 at Dartmouth College, John G. Kemeny, a Hungarian-American mathematician, computer scientist, and then president of Dartmouth College, and Thomas E. Kurtz, an American computer scientist and then professor of mathematics, created the Beginner's All-Purpose Symbolic Instruction Code, or BASIC. BASIC is a programming language that can be run on different sets of hardware, allowing for programs to be written for more than one specific computer. That way, programs, including video games, could be spread to more people. And video games were definitely something that Kemeny and Kurtz had in mind. Kemeny himself wrote a baseball simulation game in BASIC in 1965. Over the next couple of years, that was joined by a bingo game, a basketball simulation game, and a baseball simulation game simulating the 1967 World Series. On top of that, earlier games that were designed to run on computers' mainframes, such as 1968's text-based strategy game Hammurabi and 1969's spaceflight simulator Space Travel, were translated into BASIC in order to spread to more players. BASIC quickly became the programming language for video games. Although not the first programming language, BASIC would be the most important. The fourth generation of computers came with the rise of microprocessors. These microprocessors incorporated all the functions of a central processing unit into a single integrated circuit instead of large circuit boards with several integrated circuits. These microprocessors allowed for a cheaper cost due to the decrease in size and a higher reliability due to less connections that could break. The first commercially available microprocessor was the Intel 4004, a 4-bit CPU released by the Intel Corporation, an American electronics company, in 1971. Federico FAGGIN, an Italian-American physicist, engineer, and inventor, led the project with the help of Ted Hoff, an American electrical engineer, and Masatoshi Shima, a Japanese electronics engineer. The Intel 4004 was first sold as a custom chip for electronic calculators for the Japanese Busicom Corporation, but the microprocessor was essential for the future of computers. The invention of the microprocessor would lead to the creation of the microcomputer. These microcomputers were the first computers that were small enough to actually fit on a table. Perhaps these microcomputers could even be sold to families at some point. But because computers were not widely available to the public, video games were not commercially available at all. Video games were almost entirely something exclusively played at large companies, universities, or research institutions, primarily by programmers and technicians. It took until 1971 for that to start changing. Starting in 1970, American electrical engineers Nolan, Bushnell, and Ted Dabney attempted to create a coin-operated version of 1962's Space War. Failing to find an economic way to run the game on a mini-computer, the two focused instead on replacing the central computer with custom hardware created to run the game and do nothing else. In order to make this work, the gameplay from Space War had to be changed. Instead of Bushnell's original idea of having a 4-player version, the game was changed to a 1-player version with 2 computer-controlled enemies and no gravity well in the center. After a proof of concept, the two founded Syzygy Engineering and recruited a manufacturer in Nutting Associates, a coin-operated analog arcade manufacturer. Nutting Associates had just released an arcade game named Computer Quiz, so the name Space War was changed to Computer Space in order to keep the branding consistent. In August 1971, a prototype of Computer Space was released at a bar near Stanford University, where it became a success. Meanwhile, Bill Pitts and Hugh Tuck, American programmers, were also working on their own version of Space War. Instead of creating custom hardware just to run the game like Computer Space did, Pitts and Tuck purchased a PDP-11 microcomputer to run their game. While this did allow this version of Space War to be more true to the original, it also made the game quite costly. In total, Pitts and Tuck spent around $20,000, roughly $127,000 in 2020, to build a single arcade machine for 2 players. Along the way, Pitts and Tuck renamed their game from Space War to Galaxy Game due to the current anti-war sentiment. They also founded their own company, Mini Computer Applications, in June 1971. In August, they placed their machine at Stanford, where it also became popular. With the 2 different versions of Space War so close together, the 2 groups were aware of the other's machine. So, Nolan Bushnell called Pitts and Tuck to discuss their separate projects. While Pitts and Tuck were impressed with the custom hardware for Computer Space, they felt that the game itself suffered for the change. Bushnell, on the other hand, was relieved to see that Galaxy Game could not compete with Computer Space economically. It was clear these 2 groups had different goals in mind. In November 1971, both Galaxy Game and Computer Space were officially released. Galaxy Game's 1 machine charged players at Stanford 10 cents per game or 25 cents for 3 games. While the game is said to have drawn crowds 10 deep, the cheap price of each game combined with the enormous cost of building the machine made the game unprofitable. After their first prototype was released, Pitts and Tuck started working on a second machine. This new version would be released in June 1972 at Stanford, where it stayed until May 1979 when the displays became unreliable. In total, Pitts and Tuck had spent $65,000, over $400,000 in 2020, to create Galaxy Game's 2 prototypes. They did not turn a profit, but that was never the goal. Computer Space from Bushnell and Dabney, on the other hand, was a commercial success. Nutting Associates ordered a production of 1,500 units, which was a good number at the time. Within a few months, over 1,000 of those units sold. According to Bushnell, Computer Space ended up selling between 1,300 and 1,500 units, earning over $1 million, over $6 million in 2020. While this was a success, it was disappointing for Nutting. Nutting blamed the game's complexity and steep learning curve. Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney would then leave Nutting Associates, incorporating Syzygy Engineering as a company you may have heard of, Atari Inc. They immediately began working on their next game, but we will talk about that more in detail later. Spoilers. In May 1972, Magnavox, an American electronics company, announced the first video game console, the Magnavox Odyssey. Ralph H. Baer, a German-American inventor, had been working on a way to play video games on a television screen since 1966. After 6 prototypes, it would be his 7th prototype, known as the Brown Box, that would prove to be the success. Magnavox agreed to produce the Brown Box in January 1971. The console itself was a box that would connect to a television set and came with 2 rectangular controllers. It was capable of displaying 3 square dots and a vertical line on the screen. These generated dots and lines would then combine with overlays, dice, paper money, and other board game paraphernalia to play video games on a home television set. The Magnavox Odyssey was announced in May 1972 and released in September 1972. The console came with 6 different game cards that would play 12 different games in the American release, the most famous of which is a table tennis game. These cards did not hold game data on their own, but would change the circuits in the console to play the different games. Odyssey also had a peripheral controller, a light gun, that was sold separately and came with 4 games of its own. The Odyssey sold for $99.99, over $600 in 2020, or $50, $300 in 2020, if you buy it alongside a Magnavox television. The Magnavox Odyssey proved to be successful, selling somewhere between 69,000 and 140,000 units in 1972, depending on who you ask. In only 36 years, computers went from nothing but a theory to a fully functional device managing businesses. Video games emerged, starting with versions of simple paper and pencil games at conventions to being played at bars and homes with graphics all their own. So now it's time to start taking a closer look at individual video games. After all, video games are meant to be played. And those are the highlights of computers and video games up until November 1972, when the first game that we will play was released. But before we talk about that, we need to talk about the context of 1972. My name has been BALLERSCUBA. This has been Video Games Over Time. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in 1972.